So firstly, we will understand what is labor legislation. The term labor legislation is used to cover all the laws which have been enacted to deal with employment and non-employment wages, working conditions, industrial relations, social security, and welfare of persons employed in industries. The objectives of labor legislations are twofold: preservation of the health, safety, and welfare of workers, maintenance of good relations between employers and employees. Growth of labor legislation in India law is necessary for maintaining peaceful environment for the growth of the industry. Labor legislation in India has developed with the growth of the industry. In the 18th century, India was not only a great agricultural country, but a great manufacturing country too. But the British government in India, as a matter of policy, discouraged the Indian manufacturers in order to encourage the rising manufacturers of England. Various types of genuine control were applied by British government on Indian manufacturers was exploited. At that time, to protect the labor rights, Indian labor legislation was found. After studying this lesson, you will be able to know the history of India's labor legislations, underline the impact of India's constitutional framework on labor laws, analyze the impact of ILO on labor laws, discuss the role of National Commission for Labor in development of labor laws, discuss views of ASSOCHAM on Indian labor laws. After knowing a brief about Indian labor legislation, let's start its detailed discussion with its historical aspects. After independence, legislations related to worker welfare like Provident Fund Act, Employee State Insurance Act, Payment of Bonus Act, and Payment of Gratuity Act were enacted with the intention of providing security and retirement benefits to workmen. Over a period of time, several amendments have been made to the existing labor legislations as per the needs of the industry. Over a period of time, several amendments have been made to the existing labor legislations as per the needs of the industry, which can be seen by watching the table in which various conditions of workers have been shown with the actions taken and then the impact on society in respective periods. Now the turn comes to know the role of India's constitutional framework on Indian labor laws. This can be studied under three heads. Labor laws enacted by the central government, where the central government has the sole responsibility for enforcement. Labor laws enacted by central government and enforced both by central and state governments. Labor laws enacted by central government and enforced by the state governments. Some of the labor laws enacted by the central government, where the central government has the sole responsibility for enforcement, are the Employees State Insurance Act 1948, the Employees Provident Fund and Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1952, the Dock Workers Act 1986, the Mines Act 1952, the Beedi Workers Welfare Cess Act 1976, the Limestone and Dolomite Mines Labor Welfare Fund Act 1972. Some of the labor laws enacted by central government and enforced both by central and state governments are the Maternity Benefit Act 1961, the Minimum Wages Act 1948, the Payment of Bonus Act 1965, the Payment of Gratuity Act 1972, the Payment of Wages Act 1936, the Equal Remuneration Act 1976, the Industrial Disputes Act 1947. And labor laws enacted by central government and enforced by the state governments are the Employers' Liability Act 1938, the Factories Act 1948, the Personal Injuries Act 1963, the Personal Injuries Emergency Provisions Act 1962, the Plantation Labor Act 1951, the Trade Unions Act 1926, the Weekly Holidays Act 1942. These all laws have led to positive effect on the condition of workers in India. Now let's discuss the impact of International Labour Organization on Indian labour laws. This can be understood by discussions of International Labour Conference, Governing Body, the International Labour Office, International Labour Standards, ILO Conventions. The International Labour Conference has continued since its first session in 1919 to meet at least once a year. The International Labour Conference is a yearly event held each June in Geneva, Switzerland, and is hosted by the International Labour Organization. The conference makes decisions on the organization's general policy, work program, and budget, and creates conventions and recommendations. Member states are represented at the conference by 4 delegates, 2 government delegates, an employer delegate and a worker delegate. All delegates have individual voting rights and all votes are equal regardless of the population of the delegate's member state. The employer and worker delegates are normally chosen in agreement with the most representative national organizations of employers and workers. Usually, the worker delegates coordinate their voting, as do the employer delegates. Today, the governing body is the executive of the International Labour Office. It meets 3 times a year in March, June, and November. It takes decisions on ILO policy, decides the agenda of the International Labour Conference, adopts the draft program and budget of the organization for submission to the conference, and elects the Director General. The governing body is composed of 28 government representatives, 14 worker group representatives, and 14 employers group representatives. 10 of the government seats are held permanently by Brazil, China, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The remaining government representatives are elected by government delegates every 3 years. The International Labour Office, Geneva, provides the secretariat for all conferences and other meetings and is responsible for the day-to-day implementation of decisions taken by the conference, governing body, etc. Indians have held positions of importance in the International Labour Office. And the last one is International Labour Standards. The principal means of action in the ILO is the setting up the International Labour Standards in the form of conventions and recommendations. Conventions are international treaties and are instruments which create legally binding obligations on the countries that ratify them. Recommendations are non-binding and set out guidelines orienting national policies and actions. The 8 core conventions of the ILO, also called Fundamental or Human Rights Conventions, are Forced Labor Convention, Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration Convention, Discrimination or Employment Occupation Convention, Freedom of Association and Protection of Right to Organized Convention, Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention, Minimum Age Convention, Worst Forms of Child Labor. To fully understand labor legislation, we should also know role of National Commission on Labor. The first National Commission on Labor was constituted on 24/12/1966, which submitted its report in August 1969. After detailed examination of all aspects of labor problems, both in the organized and unorganized sector, the need for setting up of the Second National Commission on Labor was felt due to vast changes occurring in the economy during the last 3 decades, especially in the 90s due to globalization, liberalization, and privatization. The recommendations of Second National Commission on Labor included introduction of umbrella legislation for workers in the unorganized sector and agricultural labor. Emphasis on upgradation and development of skill of workforce by retaining or training of workers. Encouragement of small-scale industries, agri-business and rural sector for higher employment generation. Consolidation of social security legislations. Establishment of social security system. Abolition of child labor. Now the topic is Indian labor laws, reviewed by ASSOCHAM. The Associated Chambers of Commerce, ASSOCHAM, is the umbrella body for chambers of commerce in India. Established in 1920, it currently has a membership of over 100,000 companies across the country. The organization represents the interest of trade and commerce in India and interacting with the Government of India on policy issues and liaising with their international counterparts to promote trade between India and other nations. The current president of ASSOCHAM is Mrs. Swati Piramal. ASSOCHAM members represent the following sectors: trade, national and international; industry, domestic and international; professionals, for example, CAs, lawyer, consultants; trade and industry association, and other chambers of commerce. Various Indian labor laws have been continuously revised by ASSOCHAM, some of which are the Factory Act 1948, Minimum Wages Act 1948, Payment of Bonus Act 1965, and Employment Exchange Compulsory Notification of Vacancies Act 1959, Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. Now let us check if we have understood the various concepts discussed in this lesson clearly. ILO conventions are national treaties and are instruments which create legally binding obligations on the countries that ratify them. Right or wrong? Wrong. India is a non-elective seat on the governing body as one of the 10 countries of chief industrial importance. Right or wrong? Right. ASSOCHAM stands for the Associated Chambers of Commerce. Right or wrong? Right. Now let's revise the whole concept. Initial periods of imperialism were based on exploitation of the worker class. With the emergence of ILO at an international level, the whole scenario of labor legislations began in pre-independence India. India is a founder member of the International Labour Organization, which came into existence in 1919. The governing body of the ILO is the executive wing of the organization. It is also tripartite in character. Since 1922, India has been holding a non-elective seat on the governing body as one of the 10 countries of chief industrial importance. Labor legislations have also been shaped and influenced by the recommendations of the various national committees and commissions. Thank you.